With so many options, why choose Arizona State University?
For me, the only online option was ASU because of the quality. Their faculty was really involved with their students and care about your personal journey. The dedication to my personal development from my professors, that's been extremely valuable to me.
Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online. That's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Later with Mokelly on KFI AM 640.
You might have heard Mark Ronner discuss a story or previous story regarding Mayor Karen Bass and her text messages, which are not available for January 7th and January 8th, which happened to coincide with her time in Ghana and also the beginning of the fires here in Los Angeles and also Los Angeles County. So I wanted to focus in on that. And for my final thought, it's this. Let me just start with the obvious. Mayor Karen Bass will probably be reelected. Probably, most likely. And that's not an endorsement, not in the least. That's just a reflection of not having any real competition, at least not at this moment. But she surely has done herself no favors in the recent months. I really hate when politicians and elected officials try to insult my intelligence. Maybe you don't have any problem with that, but I sure as hell do. We can disagree on policy. We can disagree on strategy and messaging. We can disagree on the path forward as far as what's best for our city, county, or state. But we can't agree on you insulting me with wild, unbelievable stories which defy reasonable explanation. And I'm all about reasonable. After a public records request for Bass's text messages from January 7th and January 8th related to the fires by the LA Times, the Times said the city had no responsive records. No responsive records. A mayor's text messages from only a month ago are nowhere to be found. Bass was in Ghana when the Palisades and Eaton fires broke out on January 7th. I remember, I was covering it. You might remember as well. I was spending from 7 p.m. to midnight here talking about it for multiple days. I remember it. And also, Bass spent much of that next day traveling back from Ghana, more than 7,500 miles to Los Angeles, and she said she was in communication with officials here. So I assume she was on the phone, she was texting, whatever. You know what she was doing beyond traveling? Coordinating, not just communicating. And if you communicate with anyone for any length of time, you know that texting is not only more efficient, but it's more easily accessible for the person on the other end as opposed to leaving a voicemail. I'm sure there were multiple people trying to get in touch with the mayor simultaneously. And since she's in air, it stands to reason that texting is more efficient than calling. But none of those records are quote unquote available. That to me, and I'm just talking about me, maybe you don't care, but that to me is insulting my intelligence. According to David Michelson, an attorney for the city, indicated that the mayor's phone, and I'm quoting, the mayor's phone is set to not save text messages. It auto deletes. And I know something about smartphones, just a little bit. Auto delete is a manual setting. It's a choice. It's not a factory setting. It doesn't come to you out of a box and you install a text messaging app and it just auto deletes stuff after 30 days. And beyond that, I also know that text messages have both a sender and a receiver. I know that just deleting a message from a device doesn't delete it from a server. So the messages themselves are not lost forever, but that's beside the point. It's the principle. And as an elected official, there is every reason to believe that a mayor's text messages during an emergency have relevance and importance beyond 30 days. It's a crisis situation. There is every reason to believe that the mayor knows this as well as I do, as well as you do. I don't question whether her phone was set to auto delete. I don't question that at all. I absolutely question any such motivation, and so would any reasonable person. So let me end where I began. Mayor Bass is probably going to be reelected. Borderline definitely. And that is in part because she likely won't face any serious challengers. And I've told you about that and how that just really sticks in my craw. No one is actually going to step up. And that is why setting auto delete for your text messages during a crisis in which there have been numerous investigations and allegations of incompetence will not matter one single bit. And I get it, I really do. When there are no consequences, you can auto delete your messages, even during a crisis. How do I know? Ask the Secret Service during the January 6th insurrection. We never found those text messages either. I try to be consistent. And I really hate when politicians act like we're stupid. I know for a fact I'm not. I can't speak for anyone else, but I know I'm not. I just would rather they, as in politicians, they as in elected officials, just own up to it and say, yeah, I deleted the damn messages. They were probably important, and I know you can't do anything about it. I'm still going to be reelected, so deal with it. Close quote. That would be easier to swallow. But politicians and elected officials do these things and will continue to do them as long as they know they won't be voted out. You can't necessarily control what politicians do. You can control whether they get to hang around and continue to do them. For KFI AM 640, I'm Mo Kelly. And for my final thought tonight, I was really taken back by the news of what is happening with the Department of Education. So let me go there tonight. Both of my parents were educators for the entirety of their career on the elementary, middle school, and high school levels. They took out a second mortgage on the family home to make sure my sister and I could attend college. My sister went to Howard University in Washington, D.C. I went to Georgetown University, also in Washington, D.C. My father was the first in his family to ever attend college. Education was always the priority in my household, and it is something I have always carried with me. But I know that my value of education is not shared by many Americans these days. But let's talk about this from 30,000 feet up, as they say. In 2023, South Korea's spending on education reached 7.2% of GDP. And that exceeds the average of 5.7% and ranks second highest in the world. Japan dedicates only 4.1% of its GDP to educational institutions. And although the spending is well below average, the focus within the country is top tier. In 2024, last year, the United Kingdom spent approximately 4.1% of its GDP on education, also well below the global average of 5.7%. That's really important. Put a pin in that as well. Last year, 2024, the U.S. spent 5.59% of our GDP on education, just below the average of 5.7%, but far more than Japan and the United Kingdom. As for overall rankings of educated populations in the world, that expenditure of those various countries translates as follows. The U.S., without a doubt, is the wealthiest nation in the world. And we can't even break the top 30 in terms of educated populace. We're number 31. Korea, number 1. And they're number 1 just 72 years after the Korean War. Japan, remember, they only spent 4.1% of their GDP. They're number 6, 80 years after the end of World War II and having to pay reparations to other countries up until 1977. That's within my lifetime. United Kingdom, number 12. And just in case you're curious, China is 13, Canada is 14, France is 16, Israel 21, Russia is 22, Hungary is 30, and we're 31. Here's my point. There are Asian countries, European countries, North American countries, small countries, large countries, war-torn countries, wealthy countries, impoverished countries. For example, California's GDP is almost twice that of Russia. Russia's population is 3.5 times that of California. But somehow, Russia managed to beat the United States by 9 slots when it comes to education. My point tonight is rather simple. It's not money per se. It's not wealth of a nation. It's not size of a nation, just importance of education to a nation. Spend some time in Korea. You'll see how important education is in every facet of life. Then it starts to make sense how education directly benefits the rest of society. There's a direct correlation between education, level of crime, health, and general welfare. Spend some time in the U.S. and you'll see how little we value it relative to defense spending, healthcare, and other items. The idea of American exceptionalism is the belief that the United States is either distinctive, unique, or exemplary compared to other nations. When it comes to education, we're not, and we haven't been for quite some time. And since we're not the technological leaders we once were either. We don't make the best cars. We don't make the best semiconductors, just for example. We shame or try to shame those with education today as somehow being elitist, like it's a scarlet letter or some badge of shame. More evidence of that today with the news that about half of the Department of Education was gutted today, with some 1,300 employees being let go. According to most published reports, the cuts will all but incapacitate the agency in its efforts to distribute billions in federal money to colleges, schools, and manages the federal student loan portfolio. Oh, nothing bad could come of that, right? Well, in short, it would likely cripple our educational infrastructure in many ways. No preceding forensic audit, no scalpel to these cuts, just a chainsaw while blindfolded, indiscriminate. Because the Department of Education evidently has no value to America in 2025. And there will be a hefty price because of it. And no amount of firings will make enough room in which to afford it. For KFI AM 640, I'm Mo Kelly. And for my final thought tonight, it was guided by the story earlier tonight when I talked about the father whose daughter died from measles, and he was still standing by his decision not to vaccinate her. He's a Mennonite, a Christian sect, which doesn't really believe in vaccines, even though nothing like that is in the Bible. But that's what informed what I had to say for this final thought. We all would like to think that we're special. You, me, Stefan, Mark, Tuala, your neighbor, your gardener, everybody. We all would like to think we're special. But some of us want to believe we're special in a very, very specific way. Special in the way of knowing what other people don't know, like they have the inside track on all the secrets of the world, or especially this country. They have some particular insight into the mysteries that only they know. It's the foundation of conspiracy theory culture, which permeates our society today. We have a nation full of people, and I'm specifically talking about the United States. We have a nation full of people who fancy themselves as knowing something the rest of us just don't know. We tell ourselves that regardless of the facts, the science, or documented history, our opinions, and only ours, often unsubstantiated and unvetted, are somehow right. They know. We don't. And because of this, I argue, and I frequently argue, that this is the dumbest nation on the face of the earth, because we lean into that. In 2025, you will easily find deep pockets of people who still deny that the aforementioned earth is spherical. Despite all the available science and evidence at our fingertips, we have people literally who are building rockets to prove that the earth is flat. 2025. Or in 2025, some will argue with you tooth and nail that vitamin A helps prevent the measles, like RFK Jr. We live in a time in which conviction is confused with knowledge. Just believing something deeply is far too often masquerading as legitimate knowledge. They are not the same. And I'm sure that social media plays a role, a damn large role, but not the only role. The moment news sites like the Washington Post and New York Times and others first attached a comment section to their articles at the dawn of social media, remember that? Remember the first time you saw a comment section and you could actually type in what you thought about an article and it would get published? That moment right there was when it all started to go to hell. And here's why. For the first time, people who had never been published or been read on any level on a legitimate news site were reading themselves and were read by others right under legitimate news just by posting a comment right under that article, which had to pass multiple editors just to get published. You just went click, 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 send, and you got published. It sent the wrong message that just about anybody could have an opinion, and that opinion had merit. And on most subjects, it probably was not true. I'm here to tell you, no, it was not true. Because not all opinions are created equal. Some are more informed, some are uninformed, some are less informed, some are misinformed. And because we live in this world where we're meeting on the same social media platforms, it sends the wrong message that any and all opinions are either valid or have merit or on the same level. You know, you have Twitter, I have Twitter, you have Facebook, I have Facebook, Threads, what have you. So therefore, our opinions must be equal because they're being expressed on the same platform. No, they're not. But that's how we got here. That's why there are Facebook groups dedicated to exposing the truth behind the earth actually being flat. That's why people still believe we didn't land on the moon any of the 6 times we did. That's why people are convinced ivermectin was and still is an effective treatment for COVID because social media told them so. That's why people are willing to risk having their child die from measles, even recommending having measles parties because they saw one video on YouTube or some other random post on their preferred social media platform and feel they have more knowledge than every virologist, pathologist, immunologist, and epidemiologist who, of course, recommended the exact opposite. Because why go to college for 10 years when you can just watch 3 YouTube videos from 3 people who aren't credible, but at least confirm your bias? That right there is why polio and whooping cough are back. Because we all think we're special and live in an age where we've been trained to not trust or believe actual experts. And for that, people die needlessly. Social media, designed specifically to cater to our id and our worst selfish impulses, is how we got here. Elevating every ridiculous, uninformed, and ignorant thought which crosses our minds. And in some instances, it's getting us killed, including our children. For KFI AM 640, I'm Mo Kelly. My final thought for the week, I'm going to get financially nerdy. I'm going to have to dig in deep here, so please bear with me. The stock market has lost 10% of its value since January 20th. That would be Inauguration Day. In financial terms, that's called a correction, and it would be the first since 2023. In the past month, the stock market is down 3,900 points. Depending on what source you use, there are about 150 to 180 million Americans who are actively involved in the stock market. And by that, I mean buying or selling or trading, or passively involved. That means the 401ks, 357s, pensions, meaning about half the country is impacted by the fortunes of the stock market. As for the larger economic outlook, we've been told that the Biden economy was an economic disaster. We've heard that time and time again. In fact, some people are still saying that, even though GDP growth was hovering at about 2.8, 2.9% per quarter. That's gross domestic product. And 2.8, 2.9%, that is healthy. Full stop, no exaggeration, not really debatable. Healthy. Didn't say it was great, but it's healthy. And unemployment is still historically low at 4%. I don't know if you know this, but unemployment at 5%, a whole point higher, is still considered full employment. These are just facts. Well, why does this matter? It matters because, as I said, the talk this week was whether the country might be on the verge of a recession. Meaning, if the economy is not in a recession presently and not near a recession presently, at least as of January this year, that also means the economy is not and was not a disaster. Also, a recession is a very specific economic term. There are parameters because in a recession, principally, we have negative GDP, gross domestic product, for consecutive quarters. That's a necessity, meaning going from the 2.9% that we've seen in the past 2 quarters that I just told you about to negative numbers. It would be a sharp turn. Goldman Sachs, which knows a little bit about money, just a little bit, released a statement this week that the prospect of a recession is about 15 to 20%, but could increase if the Trump administration remains, quote, committed to its policies, even in the face of much worse data, close quote. Their words, not mine. And let me translate that. They're saying that a recession very much rests on the shoulders of and the choices made by the Trump administration. It's not inevitable, not necessarily Joe Biden, not anything happening prior to now, but what happens now and going forward. Again, if the economy is not in a recession, and it's not for the reasons I just gave you, then by definition, it's not a disaster and it's not horrible, despite what some people keep trying to tell us, or put it another way, lie to us. But that all could change rather quickly. And I know what some of you are thinking, but Mo, what about the cost of eggs? What about the cost of milk? And I would remind you, that's not the economy. That's one of the 4 major food groups. It's not the same. Each year, there's an issue with a food item due to supply chain issues. Right now, there's also a soybean shortage. Mad cows sent beef prices through the roof in the 1990s. It was oranges in 2022 and 2023. But that's not the economy. But if the actual economy as a whole should go into a recession, that means we have been slowly sliding to economic hell for 6 consecutive months, or 2 quarters leading up to it, going back to the 2 quarters of negative GDP. It takes 6 months just to officially be in a recession with no guarantee of how long it would last after that. But let me go back to the stock market losing 3,900 points in the past month. It's fair, and I try to be fair. It's fair to argue that the stock market could get all of it back in the coming years. It's possible, but it's not likely, and not everybody has those years to wait. Maybe you planned on retiring this year or next, or you will be forced to retire due to age restrictions. If so, you just got kicked in the teeth with your active and passive investments. You won't ever get that back. Maybe you're one of the thousands of veterans who were laid off as the federal employee purge continues. Maybe you are a veteran and disabled and lost not only your job, but your benefits and a good portion of your retirement, all in the last 30 days. You're not getting any of that back if the firings hold. You're just out of the game for good, saying nothing of what life may look like if we do end up going into that recession in the meantime. And that's saying nothing of the possibility of Medicaid and Social Security being cut as well. Here's the larger point that I want to close with. It's all fun and games and trying to call an economy bad or a disaster right up until a real economic disaster shows up and demonstrates the difference. I said some time ago that the markets, our allies and our adversaries, will respond and be exceptionally clear on our tariffs, our disregard for our allies, and disregard for our veterans. And now they have responded. And they have responded. So I want to add to what I said then. This is just the beginning. The market slide is not going to stop, hear me, unless the terrorists stop and the talk of annexing Canada and Greenland stop. Why? Because Goldman Sachs, the Wall Street Journal, and just about every respected economist has told us as much. I'm not saying it, they're saying it. Your 401k is saying it. If we end up in some open-ended recession ditch, it will be because our government chose it. Because it doesn't have to happen this way. It does not have to happen. We do not have to end up in a recession. They said only a 15 to 20% chance if we do not continue down this path. It won't necessarily happen on its own, but it will be a choice. So choose wisely. For KFI AM 640, I'm Mo Kelly.